My last question, which I want to ask you, is about your what do you thinking about the future of the China? Because the Communist Party of China, they said that in 2049 there will the socialism in China will be construct. And I am from Poland, and in Poland was started the contra-revolution when the leaders of the party they make treason of the socialism and became a bourgeoisie. There are many bad things in China today. That there are the billionaires in the Communist Party. There are the you know that China is not perfect. So do you think that it will go to this direction, that capitalism, these billionaires in the party, they manage to make contra-revolution, or the socialism will be built, in your opinion?
Yeah, great question, and a big questioner. One thing I'll say to start with is that China started on its current strategy, what it calls reform and opening up, in 1978. So that's 43 years ago. And now in 2021, China's still doing very well. It's still growing in strength. Living conditions for ordinary people continue to improve. Social welfare is improving, wages are improving, life expectancy and child mortality and all of these indicators are improving, which is a very different trajectory to what happened in the Soviet Union, in Poland, in the GDR, in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Czech Republic. So, so far we seem to have quite a clear difference in how those two experiences are traveling. But I'll talk more about that in a bit. I mean, in terms of 2049, the CPC is talking about becoming what it calls a fully developed modern nation and a great modern socialist country by 2049, which is obviously the centenary of the People's Republic of China. And, I think, probably we don't know exactly what's meant by a great modern socialist country. I mean, sounds fantastic. Sign me up. But in concrete terms, what does it mean? I think it means that China will continue to develop, that Chinese people will continue to become more prosperous, and that there's going to be, and this, we can see this already happening, a shift towards what they call higher quality growth. That's not just about percentage GDP, but which always takes the environment into account, and that is very focused on people's all-round and overall well-being, not only income level. And we can see this already with the victory over extreme poverty complete from last year. The focus is shifting towards dealing with relative poverty. Of course, income will increase, but the idea is that there'd be much less inequality. So the living conditions at the bottom of society will improve faster than the living conditions at the top. And certainly the regional inequalities will be reduced. So the situation in 2049 will be that, whereas you've got big differences in living conditions now, depending on whether you're on the eastern and coastal cities, which is what the big, most populated areas, cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Xinjiang, and so on. There's a big difference in living conditions between there and the western and central regions. I mean, actually, this is something that's already in progress, and especially over the last 10 years, there's been enormous investment in the western provinces in particular. And you can go to Gansu or you can go to Xinjiang, and you can see that Urumqi, which is the capital city of Xinjiang, last year opened up its first metro line, which is pretty remarkable progress. And you go there, it's got an airport, it's got a train system, it's got very nice modern housing, very nice modern infrastructure. So these inequalities are being leveled out, and they'll continue to be leveled out. You know, the idea is that by 2049, anywhere you go in China, east or west, north or south, people essentially will live well. Their basic lives are met. They have good opportunities. They have a good education. They can expect to enjoy a fulfilling life in terms of their work, their social life, their cultural life. So that's the plan, that's the vision, and it's obviously a very socialistic and people-centered vision. Are there risks? Are there dangers? Absolutely. There are internal dangers and there are external dangers, and the internal and external elements of that danger coordinate with each other and rely on each other and are hoping that they can help each other out, right? Externally, you know, as we've talked about, the West has shifted its position regarding China. The US and its allies now recognize that China is the big enemy, the strategic competitor, and so they've launched their new Cold War. They're stepping up their encirclement campaign and their containment campaign, which, by the way, is not actually a new thing. You know, the idea of containing China and overthrowing Red China goes back to 1949. It goes back to the US's support for the Kuomintang in the Civil War. It goes back to the US support for Taiwan, sending the 7th Fleet of the US Navy to the Taiwan Straits in 1950. It goes back to the Korean War, which was a lot to do with rolling back the Chinese Revolution. It goes back to the establishment of the first island chain, the use of Taiwan, Okinawa, Japan, the Malacca Straits as means of pressuring and containing China. So this is escalating. Externally, they're waging a propaganda war. They're waging an economic war, right? They're preventing the export of semiconductors to China. They're trying to get Huawei cut out of 5G infrastructure around the world. They're trying to ban WeChat and so on. So they're preventing Chinese academics and students from coming and working in the West because they don't want to share knowledge with the Chinese anymore. So that's a significant tactical shift from the West to actively prevent China's rise and to prevent its emergence as a major power. And ultimately, their aim is to overthrow socialism, is to get rid of the CPC government. And this is, this is going to continue to be a very serious threat. It's a dangerous development. Internally, as you said, you've got a capitalist class in China. You have billionaires. You have people who are very rich and who want to see that wealth translated into political power, so that they can ensure that their wealth continues and that it continues to grow and that it's passed down to their children and so on. My view is that the Chinese have been quite consistent and quite steady when it comes to dealing with this group of people. They're tolerated, but they're not in charge. I guess you've seen the quote by Eric Lee from John Pilger's film, The Coming War on China, where he puts it quite nicely. He says he's talking about the political differences between the US and China. He says, in the US, you've got a group of billionaires, maybe 20, 30 billionaires, who essentially tell the government what to do. In China, yeah, it's a market economy, and you've got billionaires, you've got very rich people, but they don't tell the Politburo what to do. The Politburo tells them what to do. The government is led by the CPC, and that means that the government is representative of the working class, the peasantry, the intellectuals, and those progressive and patriotic elements of the capitalist class, with the working class as the leading class. When they started the economic reform, when they started introducing elements of the market and private capital into their economy from 1978, Deng Xiaoping always insisted on and talked about what he called the 4 cardinal principles. So number 1 is defend the socialist path. Number 2 is maintain the rule of the working class and its allies. Number 3 is maintain the leadership of the Communist Party. Number 4 is adhere to Marxism-Leninism, adhere to Mao Zedong thought. And I would argue that all generations of Chinese leadership have stuck pretty close to this because they learned from the Soviet Union. Nobody in China, well, no one in the Chinese Communist Party wants what happened in the Soviet Union to happen in China, because it was what happened in the Soviet Union was a disaster. Gorbachev wanted to introduce economic reforms. He wanted to introduce some elements of the market. He wanted to introduce some elements of private capital. And he found that politically, the people that supported those reforms also wanted political reforms. They wanted, a capitalist democracy. And over the course of just a few years, a new ruling class was created, a new bourgeoisie was created, and it was allowed to just take over power. And all of a sudden, this great socialist country disappeared from the map. The first country to build socialism, the country that led the defeat of fascism, the country that gave such profound support to the socialist movement globally, that gave such profound support to the national liberation struggles, that played its role in the dismantling of the colonial system, that gave critical support to, crucial support to the Chinese Revolution, to Cuba, to Angola, to Vietnam, which is, none of which is to say that there were never any problems in the Soviet Union. Of course, there were very serious problems, but its collapse was totally unnecessary and was an enormous setback for the working class globally. And China studied that experience very closely, very seriously. You probably come across the famous quote from Deng Xiaoping's son, where he says, "My father thinks Gorbachev is an idiot." As long as the Communist Party retains its control, as long as it retains its China on the socialist path, as long as it continues to have a vision of an advanced socialism and a trajectory towards communism, then my view is that what happened in the Soviet Union isn't going to happen in China. Economic reform, the introductions of markets, the introduction of private capital, the existence of foreign investment, Chinese foreign investment abroad, some level of integration into global markets and global value chains. All of this has gone way further in China than it ever did in the Soviet Union. And yet China stays red, and Mao's portrait still hangs in Tiananmen Square. And China's not stagnating. China's not declining. And you can see, actually, just in the last few months, there's some very interesting recent developments, such as this crackdown, the big pressure on Ant Group, the crackdown on tech companies, the crackdown on gaming companies, on private finance, on insurance companies. The government is asserting its authority. It's reminding capitalists who's in charge, and that's important. Capitalists, okay, you exist because we kind of need you, and because that's been part of our whole development strategy. However, you're not in charge, we're in charge, and we'll let you get this big, but we won't let you get this big. We're not going to let you get so big that you can start telling the government what to do. And the state continues to maintain, very tight control over the key parts of the economy, what they call the commanding heights of the economy: heavy industry, energy, finance, transport, communications, foreign trade. The big banks are all state-owned. They call them the big four, the four biggest banks. They're owned by the state. So the government controls finance, which is the most important in terms of planning the economy and figuring out your economic strategy. Finance is the important thing to run. Xi Jinping has said numerous times, socialism with Chinese characteristics is socialism. It's not any other kind of ism. So my view, and certainly my hope, is that China will stick to the socialist path, and I expect that it will continue to achieve, remarkable victories, not only for the Chinese people, but for the people of the world.